Ryan, opening tomorrow in theaters, only in theaters.
Yeah.
Edgar Wright, Last Night in Soho, with Thomasin, McKenzie, and Anya Taylor-Joy, two wonderful young actresses.
Yes.
Matt Smith, Terence Stamp.
Oh, Terence is so good in this.
Oh man, dude, I loved him in The Collector when he did that way back in the day. So anyway, but yes, so General Zada's in this. Doctor Who is in this. So it never ends. Okay, so this is the story of a young girl who wants to be a fashion designer, goes to London to attend art school, fashion school.
Yeah.
But she has a gift, and she finds herself reliving, watching this other young woman played by Anya Taylor-Joy in the 60s in London, who is trying to make it as a singer. And so we get this back and forth time travel-y supernatural thing. Let me start with one of the quotes that I gave after I got out of the screening the other day. And that is, Edgar Wright uses music better than any director since a young Quentin Tarantino. And I don't know that I would die on that hill, but I would defend it for a while.
Well, and I think one thing that sets Edgar apart from Tarantino is that Tarantino's into a very particular generation of sounds and music and sort of things, whereas Edgar Wright, and this is partially, I think, because he's British, and in England the radio stations are radically different, but he's into a wider range, and he tends to know exactly which songs are authentic to whatever moment he's doing.
Right.
And so, I think you could compare him to Tarantino. I think his sensibilities and my sensibilities on a lot of things are pretty close. I just, he's obviously done more with his influences than I have, but I love Edgar Wright's films, and music is absolutely a part of that.
Oh, it is. I mean, Scott Pilgrim. I mean, the music is one thing, but I mean, you go to Baby Driver, and for him, the music. Quentin Tarantino is really good at scoring his films with the music that he loves, and I think what makes Edgar Wright better in that regard is you're talking about maybe his. He's not as narrowly focused as Tarantino is on a not that Tarantino probably doesn't appreciate other music, but he's got his jams. Whereas Edgar Wright really he finds the songs and the music, as opposed to like a classical score, the music in an Edgar Wright film feels like it is its own character. It's a character that's going to walk through these scenes, and it's going to add all of this stuff that you would not otherwise get. And then I think the next thing you get another one.
Well, and this film, it's particularly on point because the Soho area in London is just it's rife with music history and so much history. So he's also picked a place that on its own is very evocative of nostalgia, and it's an area of London that kind of keeps reinventing itself, and even it's a little more commercial now than it has been, but even then it still has this kind of I think when I talked to Edgar about this, he talked about how you couldn't necessarily recommend it to just anyone. You'd have to have kind of acknowledge the fact that there is this edginess to it, and a lot of that has to do with it's traditionally where the clubs are, the bars are, and the music shops, and also the adult bookstores and
Right.
the other things of those natures. It's just basically, just right off of the West End, so very accessible in a way, but almost like 2 blocks away from where the
Fancy folks.
yes. So yeah, you go 2 blocks in one direction, and you have the tourists and all that sort of thing, and you go this other direction, you'd have sort of the
Times Square.
yeah, but like Times Square, not quite in the 80s anymore, but once upon a time, like Times Square in the 80s. But
That nice transitional Times Square.
Yeah,
Right.
not nearly as I mean, it's a little more polished now than it was when I first went there in the 90s. But there's still so much history, and it's almost like it's in the sidewalk and in the walls, and because so many of the buildings have been clubs, and they've been restaurants, and they've been grocery stores, and I mean, it's
Right.
just one of those areas where the buildings have gone through so many changes, but the history of them is pretty fascinating. And Edgar, with this film, kind of dives into the dark aspects. For what, about 20 minutes, we get to think that this is a tribute to the 1960s and how great the 60s were, and then he kind of goes, but
Yeah, but let's talk about that. So Thomasin McKenzie, from Jojo Rabbit,
she was in Old as well,
and she was in Old as well, just recently. So she's our special girl.
Yes, she's she's the girl who's never really been to the city. She's a little emotionally fragile. Her mother committed suicide, and that's kind of there's this concern that she's not going to be able to make it in London, because London is this kind of brutal place, and I like her character. My earliest experiences with London were when I was 18, and so there's a lot of this film that I completely relate to on that regard as well. But she goes to London. She doesn't necessarily fit in with the other students who aren't necessarily as talented as she is, who are very showy, self-promoting.
They're very cosmopolitan.
There we go.
She's very country mouse, as they put it at one point.
Yeah.
They do call her country mouse.
So ultimately, she's living in the dorms, but she has to move out of the dorms because she just can't deal with the distraction.
Yeah, well, between the parties and the the cliquey girls,
everything is too much for her.
It's too much for her.
So she moves into a rented house, and so this house kind of becomes a conduit of some sort that she. This is, and I love this because this is very 1960s, 1970s horror, and this is where we start kind of getting. But the house starts to influence her. The house kind of takes on its own role in this, and the things that have happened in this house, and so she's kind of channeling into these things, and it takes her back to the 60s, when a lot of the things that happened in this house, which not all were pretty, happened. And it kind of turns into this really neat European mystery horror film where she's kind of stuck in 2 times. She's in the modern time, and she's stuck in the 60s as well, trying to solve this mystery.
When she goes to sleep.
Yeah.
She goes, and so she tries. She encourages it because you're right, early on she's very enamored of the fashion and the music, because she was raised on the music.
Yeah.
By her gram after her mom killed herself, and and she loves the clothes and all of it. She's a girl out of time, and she finds herself able, however, to access that, and to
go back to that time,
it's very seductive.
Not herself, but she's not even her, because she's kind of like she's having an outer body experience in that she's more an observer. And she goes to the 60s, and she gets to be the person that she probably wants to be.
Right.
The sexier, the more elegant, the fearless Sandie.
Yes.
You know, and there. I mean, there is some Anya Taylor-Joy. It has a couple scenes early on in this where she is just like, you know, I think a lot of us have watched. We saw her originally in The Witch and then kind of watched her career. And there's some scenes early on in this where it's just, you know, you see the distance that she's gone in just like 5-6 years. It's the kind of the transformation from a really good actress to like this person who makes it look so easy. There's an audition scene that she does, and it's just like, okay, you can do anything. Go ahead. You know, as an actress, I will follow you wherever you want to go because you can get there. But then the rest of the movie is kind of about tearing that person apart.
Yes.
And that's really kind of, it's an interesting dynamic. But one thing Edgar told me, and this is, I think this is really kind of cool, is that initially he met with Anya in, you know, a few years ago, probably. I think he said it was right around the Sundance, because he actually saw her there as well. Mm. And he originally pitched the movie to her where she would be Eloise.
Oh wow!
And then as
she
he
grew
wrote
out of
it,
that.
And that's the thing. You know, at the beginning of her career, she was Eloise.
Yes.
But there's no way she could play Eloise now. And I think, and that's one of the dynamic behind the scenes sort of things that I think so interesting about it is that, and why I think it works in kind of a strange way, is because both characters are kind of the same person, and the actresses who are playing them are also on similar paths, because you know, Thomasin's career also took off at Sundance, but it was 2 or 3 years later, and she's maybe 2 or 3 years behind where Anya was. And so it could be, you know, in a couple of years we see, you know, her in that place.
Right. And let's be clear, when we say behind,
yeah,
it's chronological. It's not.
Yes.
It's not talent. We're not saying
no.
Because she's fantastic as Eloise.
No, it's more of a career path thing. And it's you have two young actresses whose careers, I don't know if they mirror each other, but they're on the same trajectory sort of thing. It just happens that one trajectory started earlier than the other.
Right.
And so, you know, but I mean, about halfway through the film, I totally knew exactly what Edgar was going for, and I was totally into it. And it was more of a question of, okay, let's see where we go with what you're doing. I mean, I kind of knew what I would do with it, and again, we have some of the same sensibilities. So that was fun for me, because I just jumped on board and went with it. But I do think that there are some people who are going to react negatively to this film because it's darker than anything he's done, really.
Yes.
It does absolutely have kind of a strange European feel to it, in that it's a psychological and psychedelic sort of horror movie that has obviously some really violent moments and things, but it almost feels, it's not like a slasher movie. It's not like, it's like, you know, I mean, it feels more like an Italian film.
Okay, so I didn't make the comparison at the time, but I'll make it now. And so this is like Edgar Wright's Suspiria, the original Suspiria.
Well, and it's the color scheme that he uses there, and there's a setup there because it's a girl going to a school kind of out of her place.
Right.
You know,
but if you didn't, but if you couldn't get into Suspiria, then you might have trouble with this. But the other quote, and I think you'll appreciate this other quote. Normally I don't give, like, you know, movie poster quotes when we come out, and this I had two, and one was about him and his music, and the other one is this is the hippest supernatural murder mystery that you'll ever see, because it is a supernatural murder mystery. It is all of those things.
But it also has a lot of social context, so it's like a modern thing. and they're not very quiet about it.
Oh no.
This is. I mean, there are two female leads in this film. This is actually Edgar co-wrote the script with a woman. Her name escapes me right now, but she's actually working on. She did
Krysty Wilson-Cairns.
There you go. She did 1917. She's working on the one of the new Star Wars films she's going to be writing.
Taika. Yes, she is.
Yeah, and but she's exciting to me, and they've done some videos and things together where they walk around Soho, and I've actually been more into a lot of the promo stuff for this simply because I can watch the videos and I know where they are.
Right.
So Soho is this very vivid
That
place
helps.
for me, and so I watch kind of, and in fact, I hope to be in Soho in a couple weeks, and I'll probably do my own little last night in Soho tour where, there's a couple places I haven't been that are in the film that we'll add that to the places I need to go to.
Right.
But so it's a very female centric story and film. It's not, that's a little different from Edgar as well. But I think a lot of that has to do with the co-writing and things as well. But it to me, this movie was just it was a lot of fun, even though it's not necessarily a fun movie.
Right. No. I totally agree. And half the fun is figuring out what's going on. The murder mystery part of it. Half of it is figuring out what's real and what's not.
Well, and there's some elements of that. I mean, I don't usually sit around thinking, I could write an essay about this movie. But there are elements in this where it's like I had to sit and think and go, okay, so what is he doing here? And then it's like, oh wait, there's this element that he puts in that, because there is a question of how much is in her head and how much is really happening and how much, which is great for horror films.
Right.
But I think that a lot of that he actually kind of shows us what may in fact be in her head, what may not be in her head. There's little things here and there that I really liked about that. But you do question, I mean, that's what the whole setup is. Her mother killed herself, so is she crazy too? She's
right, exactly.
Becomes, or is she just 18 or 19 and really obsessed with something?
Yeah.
Because I think at some point in our lives we've all been obsessed about something, and we think about it so much that it kind of influences the way we see the world and see other events and see things that are happening, because we have this narrative that we're living out in our head, I guess, in a way. And she's discovering this narrative, and she starts making the narrative.
Yep.
And then it's a matter of, what does that narrative line up?
Yep.
What really happened, or there's just a lot of elements that I think are a lot of fun, but it's not nearly as funny as some of Edgar Wright's other films.
No.
And so I do think that there might be some people who aren't on board with that. Although maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people who have followed Edgar Wright's career, I mean, this isn't that far, off of what he's done before. In fact, Baby Driver was kind of a shift in what he was doing. And this, I think, the film has some similarities to Baby Driver, and then obviously throw back to the Shaun of the Dead horror aspects,
right.
and things. But I really just loved this movie. And if you see my interview with Edgar, I kind of gush, and I wish I had just shut up and let him talk. But
sometimes you can't help yourself.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing about it is I love Soho. As well. So, and he went to Soho in the mid 90s. That's when I first went to Soho in the mid 90s. So again, a lot of, there's the scene at the Inferno Club on Halloween. That's very much what the kind of scene of the 90s, what some of the clubs and things, although it wasn't Halloween, but you still had all the kind of spooky people and things.
Right.
But that was very evocative of, and it's the one scene in the film that he uses a more contemporary song He uses Susie and the Banshees track, which I just thought was pretty great. Again, because he knows what he's doing when it comes to music. But so this film to me, I'm almost just excited by where it takes place and by some of the stories that it tells that are based on, real locations and a real scene that existed in the 60s and scenes that existed in the after that. And I'm a geek over this movie. Like, this movie checked all my geek boxes.
All your geek boxes there. Ain't nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all.
I mean, from the cast.
Who am I to judge?
Well, yeah, exactly. But no, I mean, it's my kind of horror film, but it's also my kind of art house film. It's like so many different things, and there's this kind of, there's still a sense of, it's darker, but there's still that sort of wink and a smile as well.
Right. Well, except for having never been to Soho, I'm right there with you. So
you should go to Soho. Yeah, absolutely.
You know what? We check. It's on the list.
Okay.
Really quick. So, obviously, we love it and we want people to see it. We would be remiss. We mentioned Matt Smith and Terence Stamp.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm just
the men of the movie.
The men of the movie. Let's not belittle their contributions.
Oh, heavens no.
Matt Smith is not a nice man.
No, Matt Smith is the 60s guy who knows how to get girls gigs at some of these bars and clubs, but it comes at a price.
Right.
And that's one of the themes of this film, is that you have these very glamorous looking girls who are asked to do very unglamorous things with men who are wealthy but not exactly desirable.
Right.
But Terence Stamp is this creepy old guy who kind of lingers around the neighborhood.
Yep.
And he's perfect as this creepy
guy, hangs out. He takes an interest in all the young ladies.
Yes.
But he's not. Well, it's weird because they call him Handsy.
Yes. But you never see him
that.
Actually act that way. Yeah.
Right. So it's very odd that people in the pub call him. Oh, you're talking to Handsy? But he doesn't. You never see that when he's dealing with Eloise. So it's just a really solid movie all the way around, and the men play their part, but it's a 2-woman show. Yeah. Eloise and Sandie.
Well, and there's a third woman in there as well, who
Mrs. Collins
plays an important role.
Yes,
but that we'll leave that where it is.
Diana Rigg. How did we forget that?
Well, exactly. Diana Rigg, who for those of you who don't know, was a starlet of the 1960s. So again, Edgar Wright has cast pretty perfectly her in this role because she was a major thing in the 1960s. And so are there parallels? I don't know, but that's not the point. The fact that there could be parallels, or the fact that simply that she's another connection, another nod to the era that he's.
And let's tip the cap. This was her last movie.
Yes,
she did die September of last year.
Yes. So, and if you're going to go out,
this is a heck of a role.
It's a great movie to go out with.
So yes. So that is that is Last Night in Soho. Opens tomorrow. That would be Friday, the 29th of October, if you're keeping track home. Only in theaters. Only in theaters.
And it's beautiful to look at.
It is really, really pretty to look at as well. It's just really well shot. Edgar Wright has an eye for what he wants, and he gets it. It's always a team. It's always a team.
Well, and a lot of it was in England. You can't really shut things down, but a lot of it was still shot in and around the real locations. And again, for someone like me who knows the area, that's just another level of detail.
Right.
that I just love. If this had been shot in Toronto,
Right.
I don't think I would have been nearly as excited. Oh, it's
Fair
Toronto
enough.
being Soho. Whatever.
Fair enough.
Anyway,
fair enough.
yeah.
So there you go. That is it. That is Last Night in Soho. We will be back. We've got another big film coming next weekend or next week. That would be Marvel's The Eternals. Yes, we'll be talking about that soon. So watch for that to drop. Until it does, I will be out of town for the weekend covering Fan Expo Denver. So watch the Twitter feed at VS Movie Podcast. You'll see some stuff there. You'll see some stuff here. You'll hear some stuff here. You'll get all that good stuff. But until we get back to you with that film and more, because there's more coming next week, stay safe. Be good. I am Mark. That is Ryan. Bye, Ryan.
See you guys.
And we'll talk to you all later.